And joining me now to discuss this issue is a global affairs analyst, Dayo Fagbulu. Good to have you join us, Dayo Fagbulu. We continue to see rising tension and escalation between Israel and Hamas. What's your assessment of this situation?
I think for starters, one of the major problems we have is the shift in, America's diplomatic stance in the Middle East. I mean, after Trump had left, he seemed to have interjected a bit of sanity. Even though it's, like I said, it's very short-lived. It was short-lived then. But the change in policy is actually giving Israel a bit of leeway to do a couple of other things which normally they wouldn't have done under Trump. They initially took over or gave notice that they were taking over certain parts of eastern Jerusalem, which were held by Palestinians for Israeli settlers. Now, of course, we know that the position of the UN and everybody else is that they should maintain a status quo temporarily. To resolve this problem, and this hasn't happened. So obviously, we can see tensions increasing gradually. We can see missiles being fired across borders. I'm told, there must be an exchange of over 1,500 at the moment between them. And yes, the UN is worried about an escalation that could happen at any moment in time with troops stationed at the borderline. So yeah, that's what the position is at the moment.
There are those who would say, who have said that, look, the Biden administration policy is giving Palestinians the leeway. They think he leans towards Palestinians, and that is giving them the leeway to probably launch rockets at Israel. But let's even focus on the policy. Do you think at this moment that the Biden administration has any policy for the Middle East, and perhaps it has been caught unawares by this latest escalation?
Well, I'll put it this way. It's the results of what you see are reactionary, irrespective of the policy. What I mean is it's reactionary to the change in attitudes towards them. Between the Trump administration that made a clear statement that they were acknowledging Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, and an incoming administration that says we're going to change every other policy that had been laid down by the Trump administration, because they understand that there's a conflict in these policies for a nation that supports them or that has supported them over the years. You can see them testing the waters. Israel is moving in to take over settlements, while the Palestinians are responding also, laying claim to authority within these areas. So as far as I'm concerned, it's a response to the change in policy.
And that's why I was asking earlier that do you think that the Biden administration has a concrete policy yet for the Middle East, and if perhaps it has been caught unawares by this latest escalation?
I wouldn't say they're caught unawares. I basically think they need time to have a clear-cut picture of how they intend to deal with the Middle East. And especially the Israel-Palestinian conflicts. They need time to do that. They just got into government. They've dealt with the COVID situation and other problems that they had. And now they're going to turn to foreign affairs. But in the meantime, all I can say is they're gearing towards it. We know it's a very important part of the diplomatic policy towards the world. They're gearing towards it, but what has happened is that little lapse, the time in which they needed to put their programs together effectively, is what has created this escalation. And what they'll need to do is they'll need to move forward aggressively and say, look, this is our position to quell the system or to quell the conflict that is going on at the moment. There has to be a strong statement coming out of Biden's administration very quickly. And that's what hasn't happened at the moment.
We've had, like you said, you're talking about very concrete statement, and it's interesting that you mentioned that. We've heard statements from the Secretary of State, Antony Blinken. We've also heard statements from the Defense Secretary, Lloyd Austin. But a lot of people have also pointed fingers at what you just said, that perhaps the international community is dilly-dallying with making a concrete statement or taking a concrete position on the Israeli-Palestinian crisis. And perhaps that leaves the question that at this time, where does mediation come from? Who can step in?
Look, like I said, the statements from around the world are passive. They're not aggressive or active statements. They're very passive statements that give heed, warnings, saying, look, we need to avoid this conflict. We need to avoid this conflict. But there are no other concrete statements to follow up. Now, as I said to you, if nothing happens, I mean, obviously, it's very likely that this conflict will escalate a bit further into a war. And I think they realize that now. So I'm hoping that they will follow up with a very strong statement. But
before, sorry, I keep jumping in, but before the strong statement, or after the strong statement, there has to be some level of mediation. Some people have said maybe here in Africa, Egypt can step in. Some people say the United Nations need to step in because it has already started some level of Middle East peace plan. Maybe the United States, maybe Europe. Where do you think that mediation can come from at this time?
I doubt very much if the mediation is going to come from the UN, and I doubt whether it's going to come from Egypt. You must remember that the 6-day war, which they call the Jerusalem War, involved, the Egyptians and all the border countries. And Israel defeated them and took over the Gaza Strip. So you must understand that these are not the people to come in to mediate at any moment in time. Of course, you know that last year, Trump worked around things and spoke to the people in the Middle East, Saudi Arabia, and the other adjoining communities, trying to pacify them and make peace. But in this case now, there's a shift in government, and obviously it has left them exposed. I do not think mediation will come. Maybe from Saudi Arabia, maybe from the United States of America, maybe, but it won't be coming from Israel. And it's from Egypt, and it won't be coming from the United Nations. It's very unlikely. Their statements are just as passive as all the others. So I don't expect very much from them. America needs to speak, mediate.
Okay, go ahead.
America needs to speak and mediate. Saudi Arabia will be very helpful because they signed a peace pact with Israel a few months back, sometime last year. So those are the two nations that I think, or the two communities or interests that I think can actually mediate and bring peace to this situation very quickly.
Beyond this recent crisis because of the Al-Aqsa Mosque, this is a pattern. We see this all the time. Once in every few years, we see this tension between Hamas and Israel. What is a lasting solution to this, or do you see a lasting solution at all?
Well, I'm probably just as confused as the whole world, because these are deep-rooted sentiments. I mean, lives have been lost. Traditional institutional lands have been taken. People have been displaced, and I mean, there's a lot of bitterness. As we say in Nigeria, it's really going to take the grace of God. It's a long-standing tradition from ancient times, And I think it's going to take a miracle, but it's also going to take a bit of sanity between the two nations. But so far, there are no prophecies, there are no visions, there are no insights as to how this will happen eventually. It's almost impossible. They don't trust each other. They have no faith in each other. They are bitter towards each other. And they have lost lives, and they are still losing lives. So I think it will take a miracle, but a miracle we can all look forward to and expect.
Absolutely. That miracle is needed, especially when children are involved. We continue to see the loss of lives of children every other day. It's absolutely, it's a sad development. Global Affairs analyst Dayo Fagbulu, thanks for talking to us.
It's a pleasure.